Welcome. The name of this workshop is Practicing These Principles in All Our Affairs, the Principles for Each Step. My name is Betty. I am a compulsive eater, and welcome to the first ever Dallas Virtual Convention. This session's format is 2 speakers for approximately 20 minutes each. Before I introduce the speakers, here are some housekeeping information. Attendees are set to mute. We ask you to rename yourself to your first name and last initial. If you wish, you can add your phone number or email. This session is being recorded. Only the audio portion will be made available. Please stop your video if you are walking around, driving, or eating. You will still be able to hear the session. You may turn off your video. We may turn off your video for you. Please send a chat message when you are ready to have your video turned back on. If you want to change your view settings, click on the view button on the top right of your screen. You may choose either gallery or speaker view. Also, please note that chat is set to host only. Questions and comments will only be seen by the host. And our first speaker this morning is Swan.
Good morning. I am so happy to be here. When Bob sent me the email and introduced me to Kate and asked us to speak on the principles and all these affairs of our lives, I was thrilled. As it turned out, I was very clear I wanted steps 1 through 6, and Kate was very clear that she wanted steps 7 through 12. Funny how that works out. So let me do some qualifying a bit, since I understand there's another breakout session, so you may decide that you'd rather go there. I came into OA initially in 1987, and I thought that the women were very nice, and it was all largely women then, except for Bob J. He was around. And I left after a short period of time. And even though I never touched a step, somehow, without my permission, OA had ruined my binging. And I was able to see with fairly startling clarity my descent into insanity around the food and around relationships. And so I came back in November of 1989. And this time I got a sponsor and started doing what she told me to do. When I came back into OA and when I'd come in the first time, I had 7 sizes of clothes in my closet. I had developed this pattern that I was not conscious of, where I would be absolutely out of control with my eating and would go up to a size 12. And this was over 3 decades ago, before the advent of true vanity sizing. And then I would become so scared I wouldn't get asked out that I would start to restrict. And I would initially restrict by food restriction and over exercising. I could tell you what size I was at my high end, but I can't tell you my weight because I would never get on the scale. At my low end, I was 15 pounds less than I am now. And I would never stay off the scale then because that number was a marker of my value. It had become so difficult as well to lose weight the further I got into my illness, my dis-ease, that I had to resort to harsher and more stricter methods of trying to get the weight off. And so a therapist had told me I needed to come to OA. And I knew I couldn't continue to do that rigid restriction. And the reason I knew that was because the periods of time between being able to actually restrict, because I was never a classic anorexic, but they were further and further apart. And so I knew there was a time that was going to come and I was going to make that trip back up the scale through those 7 sizes of clothes. And I had no guarantee that I was going to come back down. And I was terrified. I was absolutely terrified. And so I came back in and you know, my first sponsor said, really, there's step 11 and one other step are the only 2 steps that can be taken out of sequence in OA. And the first thing she had me do every morning was hit my knees and take steps 1, 2, and 3. Make a powerlessness list, call it into her. The night before, I had to set my food up and call it into her. And you know, one of the reasons for that is so that I don't make emotional decisions the next day about what I'm going to eat. And that's the reason I plan it the night before, which I did for years. And I was nowhere near close to finishing the steps. And 6 months into coming back to OA, the desire to eat sugar was just lifted. I received my 31-year chip for that last month. And I can count on one hand the number of times I've actually felt an overwhelming desire, and they were very brief, to eat sugar in that time frame. It's just been lifted and it's stayed gone. It took me another 3 years to stop binging. And ultimately, that too got much better and resolved. And that brings me to the start of my discussion of using these principles in all other areas of my life. And the principles quickly for the first 6 steps, right, are honesty, hope, faith, courage, integrity, and willingness. And, you know, the hamster wheel of the food is deadly. It's absolutely deadly. But I was on another hamster wheel, and that was the hamster wheel of trying to make something of my life, trying to make something of a career. And I was always generating ideas. I got abstinent from sugar, the thing that was killing me the fastest, in May of 1990. And from that period of time until 1993, where I was still binging, but it had gotten better. A lot of things had gotten better. The periods between my binges had gotten longer. Relationships had gotten better. But I was always trying to generate these ideas. And in that time frame, I had started and dropped 2 master's programs. I had started and abandoned 3 business ideas up to the point of getting LLCs. And everywhere I turned, I was just met with failure for that. And during this time, I was supporting myself in administrative positions, which are critical to actually probably keeping the world running. But I just felt like I was underemployed. And I had gotten to the point where, ironically, I hated the job that I was in. I didn't hate the people, but I hated the job. And it was exactly at this point that I realized I was sick and tired of doing this dance, of trying to make something happen and never getting anywhere. And I remember the day I laid on my bed and had this conversation with my higher power. It's like, you know what? I'm done. I'm done trying to create something. And just so you know, I don't agree with where I am, and I don't like it, but I'm going to stop trying to make it happen. And it wasn't that the impulses didn't come, because I had asked my higher power to help me recognize the impulses and to have time to take another action, which in this case would be inaction, to not act on them. And they would still come, and I would say, you know what, I'm not going to pick up that temptation. If I have to be in this position for the rest of my life, so be it. Now, step 11 comes in, and I told Kate I needed to dip into step 11 because I can't do this program. And even though by 3 years in, I had gone through the 12 steps, right? But that's step 11 from the very beginning, right? I have to get in touch with this higher power in some form or fashion. And this is the way I do it. I hated the job so much that I was going into work 30 minutes early so that I could sit in my car and pray and meditate. Because I had already made a living amends at this work, because I had been put on probation because of excessive absenteeism, because I was calling in sick due to food hangovers. And so that had gotten better. And when you make the living amends, right, you kind of have to I had to still keep showing up, even though at the time I was periodically having food hangovers. So I couldn't get back into a position of that. And, you know, the step 11 and what I get from prayer and meditation is it gives me the opportunity to keep my mouth shut so that I am not making amends again. And it gave me peace around this time. And almost 30 days to the day of doing this practice, the next step came to me. And by that, I mean, someone was walking by my desk and a flyer literally flew down and landed gently on my desk. And it was for a master's program I had never considered. And it was for a subject that I had absolutely loved in high school and college, but had never considered. And it was in a direction I wasn't even turned in. And so the very first thing I did was I called my sponsor. And I'm like, you won't believe what happened. And she says, you sound like you've got a lot of energy about this, you know, why don't you check it out? And the energy felt different. You know, this was not the energy of me trying to make something happen. This was the energy of me letting my higher power into this issue. And the lights kept turning green, and it turned out there was a program an hour away from me And by the way, that's one of my metaphors for flow in my life. If the lights keep turning green, then that's one of my indicators that I'm probably on the path that I'm supposed to be on in the right direction. And so it was my first indicator that really the direction that my higher power wants me to go into may be a direction I have no idea exists, and I'm not even turned towards. And so the other issue was that up until program, I had done the expected things. I had completed high school, I'd completed college, and I told you my litany of all the things I had tried and dropped out of, right? I had a lot of evidence that I could not stick with anything, but I had stuck with program. And so I wanted to get through this master's program as fast as I could because I was afraid I wouldn't stick with it. And I did, and I had an amazing amount of success. And it was incredible. You know, I felt successful for the first time. But then I had this problem. The master's program ended, and I didn't have my next step, and my relationship ended. And that 3 years it took me to stop binging, I didn't realize, and I still wasn't this conscious of it at this period, that I was actually trying to fit myself into an anorexic food model. And for me, it's very hard to not binge if I'm starving myself. At some point, I'm going to be slingshotted back into my compulsive overeating if my food plan's too restricted. And I was not conscious enough for that. And so all of this ended. And the only thing I knew was I could not get back into the career hamster wheel and muck it up. I had gotten that lesson loud and clear. But I was so demoralized. Because the other thing I lost was my binging abstinence. I never went back to sugar. And going to meetings and relapse with that is one of the worst feelings in the world. And I lost faith at this point. And I had struggled with some of this before, but things got so bad, you know, with me going back up the scale that I was like, you know, I'm going to end this. I had my plan, I had my pills, and it was not the first time this entity had saved me, but it was the first time that I heard this voice so clearly. And it said, if you are going to take a pill to die, you need to be willing to take a pill to live. That is super logical. And I hadn't thought of that, you know, and so I needed to address that issue. My father committed suicide. There's a lot of mental health issues on my side of the family, you know. So, and when Kate and I were talking about this talk, she's like, can you kind of tie this into, you know, what principle you were practicing? Like, no, but I can tie it into the principles I was not practicing, which was all of them. And my higher power shows up, you know, it shows up in these times. And and it's critical, I can't emphasize it enough, to keep coming back, right? And so a lot of things got better at this point. I had to start another program to deal with some other addiction issues. And I had to deal with my anorexia in the 12-step program of OA. And that's kind of like my recovery, right? It can get layered. But there's an end to the addictive processes I need to let go of. And so this brings me now to the next principle, which is the hope of step 2. And let me tell you something about my experience with the lowercase higher power that I lived with. In anorexia, it's all about sucking the joy out of life. And that higher power is rigid, unyielding, harsh, and judgmental. But when I'm in my compulsive overeating, that's about shoving the joy out of life. And that higher power is the same, except it has some other identifiers: demeaning, cruel, ridiculing. And the step 2 is my absolute favorite step of all the 12 steps. The principle is hope, and it tells me that I can have a new higher power, that I can let go of this higher power. And it's got this beautiful exercise there about writing this one ad for a higher power. But sometimes it really helps to know who's holding the current position. And I found that if I sat down and answered these questions honestly, what do I think life really has in store for me? What do I really believe? Not what do I want to believe, not what do I hope will happen? What do I really believe life has in store for me around relationships, love, sex, marriage, career? If I answer those questions honestly and go through that, I'm looking at an inventory of the lowercase higher power that's currently holding the position. And from that, I write my want ad for a higher power that's going to give me the hope, and that's going to be this foundation. Because I was living with a higher power who wanted me dead. And I needed a higher power who said, Life is joyful. Life is better because you're in it. Life is good, and I am going to give you what you need, and I'm going to give you the directions. And this was a higher power I wanted to jump out of bed and get my day started with. This was the higher power who had my back. This was a higher power who, and I got this from one of my, because I started in Dallas. I got this from one of my friends in Dallas, this higher power thought I was one of the coolest kids on the block. And, it's kind of hard to go wrong with this kind of higher power. Life still happens, right? But I never again got to the point where I needed a higher power to say, I'm going to have to save you here. And so the thing is I have this thing called Teflon brain. And so when I wrote my higher power WANAD, it's not something I can check off. Every morning I sat and read this WANAD with this new higher power. And then I acted as if, step 3, faith, as if this higher power was going to show up for me every day. And then I was still waiting for my marching orders for what was I going to do next. Addictions take an enormous amount of energy. And when I got relieved of the addictions of compulsive overeating and the anorexia and this other program that I needed to work, I felt like I was sitting on a rocket fueled jet.
And 5 minutes.
Yes. Okay. And so what happened was the direction that I was given was a direction that gave me enormous energy, but that I was nowhere near good enough for. I wanted to go into the healthcare field. The only problem is I had flunked college and chemistry in college, not once, but twice. And so the first 3 months of talking about this with my sponsor, I had to do all the writing to make sure I wasn't status seeking. I wasn't trying to social climb, and the answers just kept coming back. But then, the courage in step 4 to face the negative thinking and this whole construct I had around what I could and could not do was a whole other set of work that I had to sit and write the positive about all the negative voices. You can't do science, you can't do math. And I had to, again, write these things down, but this time I had to tape them and listen to them, because when I'm hearing these negative voices in my head, they're not reading a script, they're talking to me. And I found that I could retape these messages. And then I would take one step after another. And again, critically was step 11, prayer and meditation. I got a clear blueprint, it's only happened once, about where I was supposed to go work. And then I had to complete 52 hours of math and science classes before I could even apply. And that probably sounds like hell to just about everyone in the room. But by this time, I had all this energy. I had the plan. I had this approach, and I knew, and I was exhilarated. It was one of the times in my life. And towards the end of this time period, I'm in the elevator at this law firm I was told to go work at. And the name attorney is in there with me. And he says, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "Well, I'm applying to medical school." He's like, "That sounds interesting. I'd like to see your application." I had it on his desk in 15 minutes, and he calls me in. He's like, "This is really a great application." He said, "I'm the attorney for the 7-member board of regents for the board of regents that governs all the Texas state medical schools. And I would like to ask one of them to send a letter on your behalf introducing you." I couldn't have planned this. I didn't think I was good enough for it to begin with. And this just was it all just came to pass by practicing these principles and doing it with integrity. Who wants to do those hours, but I did it, and I had a great time. And then the step 6 is the willingness, right? To continue to believe the best of myself, because my higher power can't work through me if I'm not going to believe that he believes in me. And so, and now I keep coming back to say this, because recovery is not a consequence. Recovery is an invitation to a life that is bigger and more beautiful and more empowering than the food could ever offer me. And that's kind of my message for this 31 year of my recovery path. And it seems like it needs to get out. I led a retreat last week on step 11, and I'm speaking again next weekend, and I'm having a blast, because this is a message worth sharing. Stay for the miracle. And the first one is relief from the addictions. And then we enlarge our spiritual lives to let in these gifts. And my higher power doesn't want me to hold my hands out for the gifts. My higher power wants me to build a house to house the gifts that my higher power has for me. I'm glad you guys are here.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Kate.
Hi, I'm Kate, compulsive reader, bulimic. I'm not sure how I'm supposed to go after Swan. I was a little nervous about that, but that's fine. Before I get started, I just wanted to say congratulations to Adrian and all the people who put this on. It's an absolutely tremendous achievement and effort, as every convention is, but especially with the changes, et cetera, that we've had to do with Zoom. But Swan's absolutely right. I wanted to speak on the step 7 through 10, or the traditions, or the principles in step 7 through 10, and largely because my recovery began in my mind when I finally understood the principle that is step 7, and that is humility. But to understand that, I'm going to back up a little bit, and with any bit of luck, can give you some understanding of what it was like for me, and understand how I translate all of these principles, these second set of principles, into my affairs today. I was the fat kid, or the fat girl. At age 3, my doctor wanted to put me on a diet, and so I marched into preschool and I announced to the preschool teacher that I was fat, I needed to lose weight, and I wasn't going to eat my snack. Well, the punchline to it all was the fact that I ate my snack anyway. And that would be the same punchline of my life for pretty much the next 28 years. It was a failure over and over and over again to lose weight. Now, I'm going to try to hold this up to be only because that for me, especially as a newcomer, when I came in, and even to this day, I wanted to see that you were really fat, because I didn't believe it when I saw all of those thin people. So I'm going to try to hold this up, see if I can get it a little bit so you can understand that I really belong here. There's absolutely no question about it. I've got even bigger pictures out there somewhere, but that was the fastest one I could find at the time. Luckily, at about age 5 or 6, I realized that if I worked hard at school, that was something I could finally do well. And consequently, I had straight A's from the time I was 7 on. I was valedictorian. I went to Stanford. I have 2 degrees. One of them is in math, essentially. And I went out into the working world. And by the age of 26, which was 25 years ago now, I was making 6 figures when even my friends from Stanford were barely making the rent. But none of it mattered, because the biggest challenge in my life had always been the fact that I couldn't stop eating. And I carried the shame of that failure around my body, and you can't escape it. There's absolutely no escaping it. So no achievement got me through that. I did have one brief respite, which, like they talk about in the big book, actually ended in even greater demoralization. But my junior year in high school, I lost 50 pounds and my life opened up. I mean, it was phenomenal. But they also talk about the fact, and like Swan spoke on, is that when someone first becomes sober, you have to be careful with them because they will go manic. And I did. I was sleeping 4 hours a night in the middle of flu season. And according to the 80s and what I was supposed to be, my goal weight was probably about 15 pounds underweight for me. And I got Epstein-Barr, or mono. And that turned into chronic fatigue. And every night I would run a fever, and that meant that I wasn't allowed to go to school the next day. And this went on for 3 months. And I started to eat, and I ate and ate and ate. And my binging took on a whole other realm. It doesn't matter. I promise you, whatever you've done with food, I've done it and worse. And so I always say that to anyone that I work with, because I promise you, I know how bad it is. I've lived it, and I couldn't stop. The thing that was so hard for me is I really could see how God had given me all these amazing blessings in my life. I had 2 parents who were still together. We had a nice home. I had 2 brothers. They were both nice to me. They weren't horrible. And I always thought that God just wanted me to take care of this one little thing, and I couldn't do it. So in my mind, I was this profound failure, not just in life, but to God himself. What more could he do for me? I ended up deciding that, given I was such a failure, that it was time to check out. Just like most of us have talked about. Swan talked about it. I had the same thing. I knew how I was going to do it. I knew it was very, very clear to me I was very clinical about the whole thing. And 3 days before I decided to do it, I think God intervened, and he intervened in the form of this really cute guy from school who happened to be dating a very good friend of mine who was your total California nightmare. She was blonde and blue-eyed, big chi-chi, she was a cheerleader, but he just showed up on my doorstep with a couple of boxes of crayons that you give away at a restaurant and something to color, and he hung out with me for about an hour. And I couldn't have been more surprised had the president shown up on my doorstep. But what it was is it was just enough to let me know that if I checked out, I would be missed. I truly didn't believe that was the case. I wish I could say it was enough to stop me from binging. I'd lost 50 pounds over 5 months. I would gain 80 over the next 2 years. But at least I didn't end it. Fast forward to I'm 28 and I took my first laxative. I can tell you it doesn't work. And I know I've done the research, and Tenny went through it just beautifully in her story this morning. But at the same time, I mentioned my psycho food head to my neighbor. And I don't know if you ever know what psycho food head is, but psycho food head to me is that compulsion that means that you have to eat, even though you're full, you don't even like it. It's burned, it's frozen, it came out of the garbage. It makes me eat. And she 12-stepped me with the book Abstinence, which is actually a fantastic book because it helps you understand the difference between a diet and abstinence in the program. And she encouraged me to go to meetings, but I couldn't go to meetings. I was working 60 to 70 hours a week. There was no way. All I was doing was literally working and then going to the gym to try to get rid of the fat that was on my body because I was eating so much. And if there was literature, I'm great at studying. Look, I can study my way out of anything, no problem at all. So I ordered every piece of OA literature there was. And over the next 2 years, I worked myself up to 18 extra strength laxatives a day. 3 doses of 6. Until today, until I listened to Tenny share, I had the dubious honor of being the most profound laxative bulimic I had met in program. 20 years in, I'm glad to find there was someone actually worse than I was. I came to the realization when I started to become incontinent that I either needed to quit my job and go into UCLA or maybe go to meetings. And I decided I didn't want to give up the only thing that gave me any shred of self-worth. And so I started going to meetings. It was not easy to find a sponsor. No one wanted to touch me. But when the gentleman who finally would be my sponsor was kind enough to sit down and listen to me and to listen to how bad it was, he looked at me and he said, you know, you may never be able to have children. And I remember being stunned. I mean, truly stunned by that. It was like, you know, I'm so smart. I should have known this. I didn't know. And that was when I finally got to the true principle of step 7. And I said to him, I am willing to do anything. And I meant it. I truly meant it. And what he taught me, he gave me a program of action, but what he taught me and what all of you taught me and what this program taught me was it wasn't that God was expecting me to do this one thing on my own. What he was wanting for me is to be truly humble enough to admit that I couldn't. No amount of work was going to make this happen. I had to have the humility to ask for help. And so today, in all of my affairs, when I have fear, when I'm working and it just won't work, I've had to learn to have the humility to ask for help. I ask of other people and I ask of my higher power. And to be clear, I still have to ask my higher power and say to him, God, thank you for removing my desire to eat X. It's still sometimes that simple. But if I'm humble enough and I ask, he's never let me down. Now, step 8's principle is self-discipline, and they do talk about this a lot in the 12 and 12, where many of us had great discipline in all parts of our lives, except when it came to food. And that, to a large degree, was mine. And so in this, it's a bit of an inverse in that my sponsor taught me how to translate my self-discipline with other things, which I would always make a list of what I was going to do every day, and then I would check off everything that I got done. He inverted that and put it into food. And it's one of the things that I have never seen a person fail in this program who is willing to plan their food, write it down, and report it. It's very simple. You 4th and 5th step your food every day. And I have done that for the last 20 years. That is all of my affairs. Because honestly, I write lists down and I look at what I need to get done every single day and make a plan. But once I translated it into food, my life started to open up. Now, the 9th step, the principle is love. And I like this one most of all. As many people who are especially in the Dallas area know my story, I believe that the 9th step brought me my soulmate. About 2.5 years into program, I got a Christmas card from that very cute guy, which had said he'd had a difficult year. And I looked at this and realized, looking at life through the lens of program, that I owed him an amends in a slightly different way. I had carried what he did for me as a debt of gratitude, a very profound debt of gratitude, much like an albatross around my neck for the previous 17 years. I'd actually kept those crayons. And I'm not a pack rat at all. I mean, at all. But I'd taken them to and from school. And when I saw this, I knew that I needed to pay back what had been given to me. The long and the short of it is, shortly thereafter, he professed to me that he had loved me since our freshman year of high school, to which I said, garbage. I mean, I saw his girlfriend, I know her. And he said, no, I can prove it, I can prove it. Before I started dating Cheryl, I invited you to my Eagle Scout ceremony. And I was like, really? And he said, no, I did. He said, because you didn't show. I'm like, well, strike 2. I'm the fat girl. I always show. You know, I'm reliable and I show up. I didn't believe that. He said, no, our freshman year, I'm telling you, I always had this thing. If I had a romantic feeling toward a girl, I would sign my name with a heart and I would fill it in. Otherwise, it was just a heart. And I know that I signed your freshman yearbook with a heart that was filled in. Well, of course, I went home, and in fact, my yearbooks are right behind me now, and I looked really fast, and gang, he didn't sign my freshman yearbook like at all. So, I mean, I married him anyway. He's super cute. And when I told him about the bulimia and the reality that we may never be able to have children, his response to me was perfect. And that was, it's nice to know you have a flaw. The 10th step principle is perseverance. After the second miscarriage, the doctor said to me that if you have a third, you're what we refer to in medicine as an habitual aborter. I would go on to have 5 more. The only reason I persevere in anything in my life is because I have the humility to ask for help, both from others, from God, because I have the self-discipline to do the right thing every day, both my food and the rest of my life, and because I've been given love all around me because of this program. Step 11 is about that spiritual awakening. Between miscarriage number 4 and miscarriage number 5, God let us keep one. And I'm very grateful today. I have a very beautiful 12-year-old boy who's just as crazy as any other 12-year-old boy, but he's very precious for obvious reasons. When I was 7 months pregnant, like many people, we were crazy and decided to move. Don't do that, it's really dumb. But I came across my high school scrapbook And in it, I started flipping through the pages. And I sat there, and all of a sudden I saw the emblem to the Boy Scouts of America. And with it was the invitation to my husband's Eagle Scout ceremony, on top of which was a thank you note to him from him, because I'd sent him a set of cross pens because I couldn't make it to the ceremony. That note could be a love note that he wrote to me today, complete with a heart that was filled in. Now, I sat there in our garage, crying my eyes out because, of course, I'm full of hormones. But the reality is that it wasn't that God was telling me I was worthless all along. That wasn't it. It's just I wasn't awake enough to see that I had value. I couldn't see it. So today, I work very hard to remember to stay close to my higher power. And one of the things that I do that translates into all of my affairs is I speak to my very sweet sponsor, who, God bless her, she listens to it every day. I go over my gratitude list. I make a very conscious effort of trying to find the positive in any situation. And I'm just like all of us. I have problems, I've lost jobs, I've gone through all sorts of things. But if I can look at any situation and find the positive in it, then I can stay awake to what God is trying to tell me to do today. And that allows me to do what is the principle in step 12. And that principle is service. I think it makes sense that basically you have all the other steps that come up before service, because service takes confidence. And it takes a kind of confidence that I didn't have. I'm really good in a boardroom and that sort of thing, but for the most part, I don't really know if you want to talk to me. I'm afraid you're going to reject me. And I always admired two people in my life, neither of whom are in program, but who I admired because they always said hello to people first. And these people, they're amazing. My brother was one, and the other really cute girl in school was Tara Davis. And they don't have a fear of rejection. And so in my everyday life, I take that part of service and I try to translate it by making sure that I do my best to engage people first, because I know that most people are probably scared just like me. And I'm lucky enough that I have a higher power that if I am rejected, which does happen, let's be honest, it does happen, I know I can just pray for that person. So in everything that I do, whether or not it's going to the grocery store, whether or not it's dealing with my son's hockey coach, a teacher, my boss, someone who works for me, I always try to remember to bring that positive attitude to let them know they too have value. So for today, where I bring in all of my affairs, it's the humility to ask for help. It's the self-discipline to write it down. Please, if there's nothing else you get from this, be honest about your food and write it down. It's the love that I'm allowed to have because now I love myself. Because I can show self-discipline, I'm no longer ashamed. And I can love myself, which allows me to love others. With all of those things, you can persevere through anything. Stay awake to what God's trying to tell you and the positive, because there is so much of it and you have value. You absolutely have value, and turn around and hand it back to others.
Thank you so much, both of you, Swan and Kate. We appear to have some time left. And I'm wondering, from the host, shall we open this up for some sharing today?
Yes, as long as the timekeeper keeps track. I don't think you want to go beyond 2-minute shares. I've said it so everybody could unmute themselves.
Okay, so if you would like to share, please raise your hand.
Lisa N. has her hand raised.
Okay, Lisa, can you unmute yourself and go ahead?
Thank you. I just wanted to say thank you to both of you. That was unbelievable. I was writing furiously, so thank you both. I guess what I want to know is what are some of the things you do, like the first thing you get up in the morning? You may have said it and I missed it, but I would like to know some of what your plan is and how much program you do in a day.
My name's Swan. I'll pitch on that one. So I still hit my knees first thing in the morning, and I normally say step 3. That's one of my favorite prayers. And then I have some meditation books that I occasionally read. I usually use the For Today book, and then there's a couple of other meditation books with other 12-step programs which are about trusting life and trusting my higher power. And because when I have an addiction, I kind of need to have a more rigid lane I stay in, and that's important. But there's others that are all about the beauty of what this life has to offer. And then on a daily, I probably meditate now 5 or so times a week. And now I set my limit. I set my timer so I will stop. I mean, that's a relatively new experience in the last year, but it's a nice one.
Thank you.
And I have constant conversations throughout the day with my higher power.
Thank you. Kate?
Oh, honestly, I still weigh and measure my food, but in the morning, the first thing I do, I have to admit, I swim almost every single morning, and I get in the pool and I meditate. I use that hour of time to meditate. And everybody in my family knows if I haven't been swimming. Let me put it that way. Mom, go to the pool. And that meditation is profoundly helpful for me. When I wasn't swimming before and I was working a lot more, I used to do it in the car. Just listen to what he had to say.
Thank you.
If you'd like to share or ask a question, go down to the reactions at the bottom right of your screen, raise your hand. And I see Maria G has raised her hand.
Hi, yes, I'm Maria G, compulsive overeater and sugar addict, and I just want to thank both of you for focusing on being disciplined in a plan and a food plan and a daily plan of activities. And these are all the things that I have not done. However, I'm maintaining my sugar abstinence, and I feel very good about a program, but I personally just need more discipline, self-discipline, less self-will, and especially with my plan of eating. So your shares about that, about how important they are, and of course, a higher power, belief in a higher power, and being open to what he has in store for us. And I just want to say thank you, both of you. It was a beautiful share. Thanks.
Does anyone else want to share or have a question for the speakers? Raise your hand if you do.
It looks like Shelley B has a question, her hand up. Shelley, if you'll just unmute yourself.
Great, thank you very much. I'm Shelley B from Texas, compulsive overeater. I am so grateful right now because I just don't think I could have related more to these two stories. I heard so much of myself in both of you, and it's amazing to me how much I admire both of you, yet I still fall into a lot of self-hatred and distaste for my own self. And instead of having that level of love and admiration, but it is nice to hear your struggles and see myself in it. I really, I was also the academic overachiever. That's what I did to compensate. And I really, the way that Kate summarized it, of no amount of work is going to make this recovery recovery happen. And then I had to have the humility to admit that I couldn't do it. I too was so privileged, and I thought, God has just wanted me to do this one thing. I suck. I can't believe I can't do this. I have every privilege afforded to me, and I still can't do this. And so, and I still try, even in program, I get caught up in working it so hard. I'm going to work it so hard, and I'm going to make it work. And I forget that I can't. The whole point is that I can't do it myself. And I like the idea of building a house, that my higher power wants me to build a house so that I can receive the gifts that I'm to receive. So thank you both for these words of wisdom, and really appreciate your service.
I have a question from Gwen N. She wants to know, when you meditate, what does that involve? Is it guides, conversation, or just quiet reflection? For either Kate or Swan.
Kate, do you? Okay. So when I started in OA, I did a lot of guided meditations. It was great for using that form of imagination, which it talks about in the AA 12 and 12 in step 11. And then I would use, just more recently, I've been using a count where I don't breathe weirdly. I just count my breath to 7 going in. And Jim, you were at the retreat at Glen Rose, right, where we had that person who spoke, and the whole weekend was about learning this form of meditation. And it's just very helpful for clearing the mind, and I've really enjoyed that. I've learned some other meditation techniques as well. Those are what I do.
I was always really intimidated by it because I figured it was something like everybody else had understood it better than I did. That's probably what I think about for most things. But before, what I would do is, honestly, I would just turn off the radio, get quiet in the car, focus on my breathing as you're driving, and just listen and do my best to listen to what God wanted for me to do. I still do that. I like that in the pool because there's nothing that can get to me. But I also do repeat some positive affirmations that help me believe that I know this sounds so silly, and forgive me, but it's help believe that I have value and that good things are supposed to be coming for me. And that is very helpful, at least for me.
Do we have time for one more?
We're a minute away from closing. So maybe just a brief.
Okay, there's Tina here who has a question as well. You can unmute yourself, Tina.
I am Tina, compulsive overeater and bulimic and sugar addict. And I'm so glad that I got to hear these two beautiful ladies talking about the program. And I did, every time I want to meditate, and like Kate was saying, turn everything off, but I cannot turn my mind off. That's the problem. I'm having, yesterday morning, I really tried it and practiced, and it didn't work for me. So I don't know what I'm doing wrong. I keep saying, what am I doing wrong? And I'm just new in the program. My 30 days was yesterday from sugar. I never had 30 days without sugars. There is no way. I'm just amazed that I have that. Yeah, and thank you. But I'm just going to keep coming back. I was on OA years ago in the 90s. And
Time.
okay, thank you. Have a wonderful day.
And we want to thank Kate and Swan and everyone who attended this session.